Hey, my name is Matt Johnson, and today I want to share with you how to quickly and easily film with the S-Log3 picture profile in your Sony FX30 camera. And to save you time and make this picture profile super easy to film with, I've created a set of video presets called Who is Matt Lutz that are made specifically to work with S-Log3. I've tested these presets extensively with the FX30 and they look fantastic, and I will link to them down below in the video description. Getting started now, first grab your FX30, navigate to the log shooting menu, and the first thing you should do is make sure that your camera is set to flexible ISO, and that for the color gamut it says sgamut3.cine/slog3. Alternatively, if you're filming in Cine EI mode, the settings are going to be different, but good news, I've made a tutorial all about Cine EI mode, so if you want to use that instead, or if you're totally confused and you don't know what that is, you can click here in the corner, or I will link down in the video description to a video all about Cine EI. Anyways, this tutorial is mostly going to be focused on using flexible ISO mode with the FX30, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to apply to Cine EI mode as well, so watch both of these videos. Next, let's talk exposure. If you want the best possible image quality out of the FX30 with minimal noise, you need to make sure that you're exposing properly when filming in S-Log3. How do you expose properly? Well, just like the A7S III, FX3, and A1, etc., you actually want to overexpose your footage a bit when filming. Then, when you color grade, you will bring the footage exposure back down when you add contrast and saturation, which will greatly minimize any noise in your footage. Going back to your camera now, looking at the bottom screen, you're going to see your shutter, speed, lens aperture, and the letters mm and a number. With a traditional camera profile, you would want your camera's metering, which is the number next to mm, to read 0.0, which means that the image it is recording isn't over or underexposed. If your camera says -1.0, it means that it is one stop underexposed. If it reads +1.0, that means it's one stop overexposed. But remember, we're shooting in S-Log3 and you need to overexpose it to make sure that it is properly recording at the right exposure levels. So you are actually going to want your camera's metering to read between 1.7 to 2.0 stops over. That is going to look bright, but I promise you this is how your camera will look its best. Also, be careful, because when I say you can go up to 2.0 stops over, you're going to want to make sure that the 2.0 isn't blinking. If it is blinking, that means that it's over 2.0 stops, and that's a bad thing because it's too bright. Now, to help you out with exposure and make sure you aren't overexposing your footage, I would also highly recommend using zebras. Not like the animal, like the effect in your camera. Enabling zebras on your FX30 will tell you if your footage is overexposed by putting these nice black and white lines that kind of look like zebra stripes on the overexposed parts of your image. You will need to calibrate these zebra stripes to work properly with your S-Log3 footage though. Incidentally, if you've watched my FX30 setup video and downloaded my settings preset, you should already have your zebras set up for S-Log3. If you haven't watched that, I will link to that video in the corner and down in the video description. Also, in case you haven't downloaded those settings, here's how to set up your zebras properly. Go into your camera's menu, go to exposure/color, zebra display, and for zebra level, you're going to want to go down to C1 so you can set a custom zebra level. Press right and select lower limit, then press right again and change the number to 94+. Next, make sure zebra display in the menu is turned on, and as you start to bring up the exposure of your camera, either by changing your aperture or ISO, you're going to notice zebra lines appearing on the overexposed parts of your footage. Because you set your zebra level to 94+, that number is the maximum brightness the S-Log3 footage can handle before it clips the highlights and cannot recover them. So as you are filming with your camera, I would first look at your metering and make sure it is between those 1.0 to 2.0 stops over, and then I would look for any zebras to appear on your screen. If they show up, then I would consider what you are filming. If you're filming a person standing in front of a sunset and you have the super bright sun and clouds behind them, you're probably going to see some zebras in the background, and that's okay. But if you're seeing zebras on the person's face or skin, that means that your footage is definitely too bright and your exposure needs to be darker. Keep in mind though that the camera's metering isn't that smart. It's not the best at telling if it's looking at a bright light or a person when you are filming, which means that you may be filming someone and the metering is telling you they're 2.0 stops overexposed, but in reality, there's a bright light behind them that the metering is picking up instead of the person. and that person is actually underexposed. So to help your metering out and make sure that it's accurate, one trick that I use is to move closer to someone that I'm filming and stand, say, a few feet away from them. And then I check my metering to see what brightness the camera says their skin tones are. If their skin tones are between 1 and 2 stops over, then I know they are exposed properly. Then I can move back further away to my filming position and film them. I would also highly recommend filming some test shots with people lit by different light sources. As you gain experience with watching your metering in zebras and then color grading your footage to see how it looks, you're going to get a great idea of how the camera is exposing and what looks good. All right, you've got your metering set up and your zebras. The last thing we need to talk about is ISO. If you turn your ISO up, your footage gets brighter. If you turn it down, it gets darker. But there are two very important things to keep in mind when it comes to your ISO and S-Log3. And these two things are specific to the Sony FX30. Looking at the ISO menu of your FX30, you'll see that you can actually set your ISO all the way down to 200. But all these ISOs from 200 to 640 have lines at the top and bottom of the numbers. But when you get to ISO 800, those lines go away. This is because in S-Log3, the recommended base ISO is 800 on the FX30. This ISO 800 is the lowest ISO Sony recommends if you want to maximize the dynamic range of the camera. As I just showed though, you can go lower if you want to go all the way down to 200, but you're going to have a big issue once you go below 800. The issue is that if you drop your ISO below the base ISO of 800, the camera is going to start to electronically clip the highlights of your footage at a lower level, which means that you're going to lose dynamic range, which is really the whole point of filming in S-Log3. So, as a rule, I would never recommend dropping your ISO below your camera's base ISO if you can help it. Adjust your aperture and shutter speed, and consider investing in an ND filter before dropping that ISO below 800. Got it? Okay, we've covered minimum ISO, but we aren't quite done talking about ISOs yet because we need to talk about low light performance with the FX30 when filming in S-Log3, and specifically the ISOs that I'd be careful to avoid when filming with the camera. The FX30, like other Sony cameras, has what is known as a dual base ISO. This means that there are two ISOs where the camera will look its best and give you the absolute maximum dynamic range that it is capable of. This dual base ISO will change depending on the picture profile you're filming with, but in the case of S-Log3, these ISOs are ISO 800 and ISO 2500. We've already discussed ISO 800, but ISO 2500 is also super important because this is another ISO where your video will look its best and cleanest with minimal noise. So as a final rule of thumb, I would recommend either filming at ISO 800, or if you're in a low light situation, I would bump up your ISO to 2500 to guarantee you have the cleanest footage. Of course, if you need to go higher, you can. Just keep in mind that 800 and 2500 are the sweet spots for noise-free footage with the camera. All right, and that's how you film an S-Log3 quickly and easily with your Sony FX30. Remember, my Cine EI filmmaking tutorial as well as my S-Log3 color presets that I've tuned to work perfectly with footage from the FX30 are all linked down below. And if you combine those presets with these settings, hold on to your beard because your footage is going to look awesome. I will also link down below to my other Sony FX30 videos. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.